Yes, yes, yes. What's up, everybody? Happy Friday. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. We're going live from Brooklyn. I'm in my restaurant, Della, New York City. My guest today, I think he's in Queens. He might be. He might be upstate. We'll dissect all that as we get into this. Before I bring my guest on, the message of the week. It's short and sweet. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Let's hear what my old friend Justin Hoch has to say about that. What's up, my brother?
Hello, how you doing?
Hello, how are you? You're handsome too.
Oh,
He's sending
stop.
me like little love messages, screenshots of myself.
Yeah,
That's
well, I
cute.
figured you'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm still only going to mark you as much as I promised I would market you.
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fine.
There's no
Well,
bonuses for flattery.
I don't do it for like the perks. I do it because it just feels good to give.
You are such a sweetheart. That's why you're here. That's why you're in the hot seat. All. So Justin, he has a photography company called JHoch Photography. He's also an actor here in New York City. Are you in New York right now? Or are you upstate?
No, I'm up in Binghamton.
You're in Binghamton, but you got a place in Queens as well.
That's where I live. Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
rental property up here that I've been working on for the
right.
last 2.5 months.
So that's the other thing. Besides photography and acting, he's also dabbling in investment real estate and is quite the carpenter and handyman. We ripped a couch apart together once. That was lots of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's always fun.
I had this oversized couch in my old apartment. We could not. I don't know how to. I remember when we moved in. That was like 11 years ago. They had to take the window out to get the couch in, and I was like, I'm not fucking doing that. So Justin came over with some hand saws and some crowbars, and that couch was done. It was bye bye, and we ripped
Yeah.
it apart. Ripped it apart with our bare hands because Justin is also a grappler. So you went to University of Binghamton, is that correct?
Yep,
You studied there, and you did some wrestling
I
in high
did.
school and at Binghamton. So give everybody a little backstory. How did you get to such profound accomplishments?
Oh, well, I don't know about
Oh,
that, but I've always been interested in a lot of different things, and I've just pursued my interests, right? So if something is intriguing to me, I'll go after it. I'll learn about it. I'll do it. When necessity speaks, I invent ways to solve problems, right? So, uh, yeah, I just chase whimsy.
well, that's like very grappling kind of jujitsu mentality, right? It's like there's always that sense of pressure. There's always like you're always getting tossed and turned. It's dynamic problem solving, and
Yeah,
I definitely want to like talk about that a little later. Let's start with like the business aspect though. So at a certain point, you got into photography and made that like a main gig. Did you study photography in school? What was your degree in at Binghamton?
I got a bachelor's in psychology and a bachelor's in management with a concentration in finance.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
then after I graduated, I took two full-time jobs concurrently. I was working, I was working at
He's a
a,
hustler too, if I didn't say that.
yeah, I was working at a drug and alcohol rehab nonprofit,
Oh, right,
and
right. No, yeah, I remember that.
doing the installation of a database to track the use of homeless services. And then at night and on weekends, I was going to a techie t-shirt company and doing business development. So I did that for a while. And then I decided, well, and actually all of that all along was to create a backup plan in case my acting career fizzled and didn't work out. So after a couple of years of doing that up in Binghamton here, I decided it was time to move to the city. I jumped ship here. I had the rental property I'd bought and spent a couple of years fixing up and getting ready so that it was possible for me to make that move and for this to be like a passive income stream,
Yeah,
and putting that
beautiful.
financially to work. And and then I moved to the city, and I was pursuing acting as my main thing for like 5 years. And I didn't want a job because that would, hold me down and make it
Hmm.
difficult for me to go to auditions and control my schedule. So I just started picking up random gigs. I spent the first year mostly making my income as a handyman.
Mm-hmm.
And then I picked up an editing job where I was working on somebody's novel and doing the graphic design layout and putting together the construct of the book for submission to publisher and all that kind of stuff. And I picked up IT jobs where I was doing like networking for different companies. I was building websites. I was babysitting. I was doing moving stuff. People needed a couch. I had a van. So I was doing stuff like that. And then photography entered the mix about a year and a half, 2 years into that process. And it was part of the mix. It was never like more than half of my income, but it was the biggest chunk about 5 years in.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I took a job at a youth wrestling nonprofit called Beat the Streets. And they were initially just a client. I was also doing grant writing. So they needed some help diversifying their income streams. So I came on board and started, again, picking up random kind of things. Like I could handle the ticketing for the annual gala because I had tech background, and I started managing the website. And then I was helping kids do whatever they needed to do to get their lives in order and straighten things out so that they could succeed in life. And then that eventually grew into a full-time job, and I worked there full-time for a couple of years. And then I left there in 2014 and decided to go full-time photography. I had continued shooting, right?
Yeah.
Through that job. That was one of my responsibilities. And so I continued doing the photography. And then when I left, I was like, all right, let's see if I can do this full-time. So that was 6 years ago.
And the photography, when did that like enter your life? Was that something you just did like as a kid and just were always passionate about and just?
It was a little, it was there. It was something that I did as a little kid. I had like a little like click camera. I had like the film that looked like binoculars from the side.
Those disposable cameras you could get from like the drugstore. Those are the best.
Yeah, that's even a disposable one. It was just like it had like the flashes and like the cartridges that you would stick on top, and it would actually like explode a bulb. And then there was like 5 of those in this like cartridge.
Yeah.
Right. So I had one of those. Yeah. And I didn't remember it being like a big thing for me. Like it wasn't something that I was like really passionate about or really interested in, but I had it and I liked doing it. And then I really got into this idea of documenting things and like saving them, because memory is terrible. Like human memory is so fallible and just awful. So this idea of capturing things and having an objective sort of memory of something really appealed to me. And at first it was video that I was more interested in.
Yeah.
But that was just too much post-production, right? Like it was pre-digital, so I was working with like cassette tapes, and it was too much work, and it was too much stuff to like manage. And then when I got out of college, I decided that photography maybe was a little more accessible. So I got a camera. It wasn't like a big SLR. It was just a point and shoot. It had like a nice optical zoom on it, but it had manual control, so I could kind of learn. And I did that as a dipping my toe in the water sort of thing. Is this something I'm really going to pursue? Is this something I'm going to be interested in? Before I invest a lot of money and throw money away potentially. Let's see if I like this. And I brought it with me everywhere I went, and it started being a thing that I would do. I took headshots at my old job, the nonprofit, right? The first one when I still lived here in Binghamton. And it was kind of in a rural setting, so we would get visits from animals. And so anytime like a groundhog came around, people would say, "Oh, there's like something out front, get your camera." And so I would come out and I'd take like these like pseudo nature photography shots. I got like pictures of bunnies, like tiny little like babies, like with their ears poking up amongst the grass, and like that kind of stuff. And that really was kind of when it started. And then after I moved to the city and was doing that and just freelancing full time, as a business, right, and just picking up random stuff, it became a business opportunity.
Yeah.
And then I got an SLR and that's been like my main thing since.
Boom. I love how you just like effortlessly tied everything into the message today, that the picture's worth 1,000 words. And that's one of the reasons why it's like, and I like that you brought up video, because I was going to ask you about that. Like, why not video? Because it's so like necessary, especially for business today. But I mean, photography still big time on the map. Like I'm doing, and you're right. Like the video editing is just so time consuming. Like I finally just like hired somebody, to just help, because I was sitting there subtitling, cutting the chunks of time out from like, and it's hours, and I just don't have that time anymore. But photography, you can get it done rather quickly. You can bump it out. It's very translatable to like all platforms. And it still conveys a big message.
Well,
there's so much to be said in there.
Yeah, well, it actually does some things that video can't do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we're processing the world or as we're watching a video, we're constantly like ejecting information from that signal out of our brains because we can't process, and it's not all relevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do in a still photo is you can stop a moment in time and analyze different things that you wouldn't pick up on either whether watching it live or watching a video. So there's an intrinsic power to it that supersedes kind of like the perception that you can get during even just being there. Like I'll look at photos afterwards and be like, I had no idea this was happening while I was taking
that
thing.
Yeah. You see something in there and you're just like, what? Like that was there?
All the time. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So, yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
That's a great explanation and just like elaboration of that message. You knocked it out of the park. That's it. Okay, we're done.
All right. Yeah.
That's the show, everybody. No. Okay. We are going to take a break, though. We'll come back, and I don't know. I'll set them up with something else. We'll see. This is going to be a fun one. All right, everybody. Hang tight. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay, everybody. Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, this is the Entrepreneurial Web. I am your host, Jeremiah Fox. We are here with Justin Hoch. He is a Queens resident who also has investment property in Binghamton, where he went to school. He's in Binghamton currently, but he is a New York City-based freelance photographer, actor, and is also, as he explained, and I think many of us did this upon arrival to New York City, just did like every gig under the sun. I did so many silly things, but he was even like the man with the van. He can disassemble a couch with his bare hands. And so we just did a little background on him and how he ended up meandering through to a photography business. And we're going to talk now a little further about some of the other things that he's done with that. He was also a grappler in high school and college. And at a certain point, the photography business really kind of zeroed in on the international grappling scene. So any of you that listen to the show or follow me on social media or know me, know my passion for grappling, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, judo, all those types of things. So we're going to get down to the ground and figure out like how did that tie in together? How did that become kind of like a hyper focus for your photography?
Yeah, that was, it was something I was passionate about, right? Like I started wrestling when I was 4 and I wrestled competitively for 20 years. I wrestled in college. I did 5 years in undergrad so that I could continue wrestling or redshirted. Like I did like the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And then I worked for a youth wrestling nonprofit, right? Like, so for those of us who have gone through wrestling or other, grappling kind of like institutions, right? A lot of things, but wrestling in particular has this something about it that what it instills in you when you go through it is foundational for everything else you do in the rest of your life, right? And those of us who have, grew up wrestling really believe strongly in that. And we identify that as being a critical factor. And it's a tool then that, we want to deliver to other youth because it was so important in the way that we became who we are that we want to spread that power, right? So, so there's this nonprofit, Beat the Streets, that got started up, and I, hooked up with them and worked there for a few years. And then when I left, I had, I didn't want to stop spreading that message of wrestling, right? At the college level, like it's lost a bunch of programs in the last 20, 30 years. And so opportunities have been drying up, and it's never really been an urban sport anyway. It hasn't really taken hold in a lot of cities and like high school and things like that. And so, so the mission of Beat the Streets was kind of like to spread it and preserve it and build it in urban areas, right? So I didn't want to stop spreading that message and telling the story of wrestling. So there wasn't like an economy for wrestling photography, right? So I was just doing it first because I cared about it and I wanted to keep telling that story. But because I need to survive and pay my bills, I've turned it into a way to like actually make a living. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that I'm like making a living on wrestling photography, right? But I'm at least like not losing money on wrestling photography. And it's taken 5-6 years to get to that point where it's actually an income stream and not an expense.
And the grappling scene has also improved, especially in terms of their events. I mean, even just in the last 3 years, they've gotten tremendously better. They've kind of taken some lessons from the UFC in terms of promotion and just making the event more of a thing where when you take a picture of it and you put it out there, people are like, holy shit, that looks fun. You know what I mean? And it's not bloody, you know, there's no striking, whether it's submission grappling or you've done a lot of stuff in Europe as well. I mean, in the States, it's pretty much, nothing happens past college, right? In terms of wrestling, unless you get into the submission grappling scene and you're dealing with like, it's often a mix of jiu-jitsu and catch wrestling. And
no, I mean, if you're like on the Olympic like path, like there's a lot.
I guess there's the Olympics. I forgot about it.
Right, yeah.
We lost it and we missed them this year, right?
But to be honest, like that economy is really evolving a lot too, right?
Okay.
Like, I'm doing a lot of time now. Like I've been to 3 different events during quarantine for like professional wrestling, right? Like Olympic style wrestling, but as a professional pursuit, right? And that's a new thing. Like it's a really evolving space. It's actually really interesting.
And that's happening in the States?
Yeah. I was,
cool.
was in Penn State on Tuesday, shooting an event. I went to Chicago in July, I want to say, maybe June. And then I went to Austin, Texas in July or August. There's another event coming up in Austin. There's an event coming up in Iowa. So, and Penn State's going to do, more of these going forward. And that's part of the whole infrastructure of wrestling that's kind of building up around the Olympic movement, right? A lot of these regional training centers are popping up. And so like the one at Penn State is the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, the Hawkeye Wrestling Club in Iowa. And they're just all over the place. So they're paying athletes to be full-time athletes. They have a stipend there, and then there's these fight cards that are, again, taking from like the MMA community and building up events around that. Flow Sports, they do the Who's Number One event, which is... Yeah,
I wanted to ask you about them and your connection with them. I finally, especially, before I never really had time and I was training every day, so I just didn't feel that need. But I finally, like, when that last one that came up with like the Ryan brothers and Mateus Denise and Palomiel, I was like, man, I'd kind of like to see that. So I finally got the app and I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. But I remember you posting stuff, like working with them throughout the event. So the more like Olympic style wrestling events, are they similar to like, I don't want to say Metamoris because they're done, but what's like Polaris out of the UK? What's the one that Hollis Gracie started here in New York? Why am I forgetting the name of that?
I don't know those. The ones that I'm tuned into, like I don't do as much with jiu-jitsu. I've done a couple of events, but I'm far more involved in like the wrestling community. And there's some crossover, but it's not a ton. The wrestling stuff is pretty independent. USA Wrestling is the national governing body for Olympic wrestling in the United States. They do, the nationals and the world team qualifiers and that kind of stuff. And they do a range of events from youth level up through senior level. And then you've got some of these other startups like Flow Sports. They have verticals in like 23 different sports or something. And Flow Wrestling and Flow Track are like their big, well, Flow Grappling actually is, I think, depending on which metrics you look at, there's like a bigger following for grappling than there is for wrestling. But I think like Flow Track is their like most trafficked site. But then it's like wrestling and grappling, and they do events. So they've got some stuff coming up where they are putting together a catch weight 8-man bracket, and the winner is getting, I think, 20 grand, and the runner-up's getting 5, and then everybody else is getting $1,000 a show. And they've got another event coming up where they're doing a similar sort of thing with guys at 150 pounds. And they've got an event coming up where, two really big guys in the wrestling world are going to face off that normally wouldn't. They're different weight classes, right? Yeah. And so they're like a super match. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening, and there's new players in that space too. Mission Underground, they started a new thing. And they did.
Let me see if I can find the one that they were doing stuff out of the what's it called, ballroom, Bowery Ballroom here in New York. They did a number.
I don't know about that.
What am I? What's it?
There's so many things out there. It's hard to keep track of everything.
I'll find it by the next commercial. I'll get it, or during the next commercial, I'll pull it up. But
sounds good.
So the events they're putting on though are like, they're hyped up. They got like the smoke machines and the lights and everything, and it's like it's a big deal, and that is more attractive to like a wider audience, and it's bringing more people in. And like you said, they're actually paying the athletes. They're actually paying. Like Flow's got a whole freaking setup. I saw behind the scenes. I think it was at like one of the IBJJF qualifiers in California a year or so ago. And it was like an entourage that they were bringing to this event. And I was like, this is like full on media company.
Oh yeah. They're VC funded. I mean, they got millions in venture capital, right? So
I saw some early stuff from them, and I'm like, oh, it's a couple guys with like a camera. Like they would go to Henzo Gracie or Marcelo's or Unity, and they would film. And maybe that's how they started. But it was like at a certain point, I was like, holy shit, these guys are like doing it.
No, it was like two brothers in a van driving around,
right,
order and put it like just making stuff. Like it really was that. And then it grew and evolved, and then they expanded in a whole bunch of different sports and all these different verticals. And I mean, now it's a full-on thing. Like they roll deep when they come into a place to put on it, and they produce events, and they are rights holders for a lot of other events. And so events that they're not producing, they're covering and are the broadcast partner for.
Right.
So they're big. Yeah, they're a big player in the space.
And do you get work from them as like a freelance photographer?
Yeah, I shoot events for them sometimes, and I'm tight with a lot of the people down there, and there's a lot of relationships that you built over the years that are great.
That's awesome. And then you travel to Europe and other places around the world often to document as well. And what's the scene like there? It's still a form of grappling, right? Like you said, it's not so much jiu-jitsu, but it's like grappling arts. And are they doing something similar where it's like post-university, maybe tied into or like he laughs, okay? Don't go too deep, because in a minute we're gonna have to take another break. But lay the foundation for this, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back and dissect that giggle.
Yeah, there's no other country in the world that does university sports like we do.
Okay.
So that's why I laughed, is because there's no post-university thing in Kazakhstan, right?
Right. It's just a school of Khabib. You wrestle with bears as a kid, and if you don't survive, well, then you're just not going to make it in the real world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's just a different model, and that's what, because I wish that opportunity existed other places, but that's just not how it works. So internationally, it's all Olympic stuff. Like we wrestle a completely different style in the United States schools than anywhere else in the world. Like it's not the same as what's in the Olympics. And we're the only country in the world that wrestles that style.
And what, that's just called, is that just freestyle?
No, freestyle and Greco are the two Olympic styles. And we have what we have in school. It's known differently in different regions of the country. So like some places call it folk style, some places call it collegiate, some places call it scholastic, right? Yeah. And what it rewards is different. So it creates different strategies for success. But that's our folk style, right? So like Japan has sumo, and Senegal has lam, and
dude, that's the Senegalese fighting is crazy.
yeah, right. And their like highest level of this does have striking.
I've seen it. They're like open hand slaps sometimes, or I saw one where like one hand was wrapped in like this crazy like gook, and then they like grounded in the sand, and they would hit with that only one hand, and each person. It was like that, yeah, but not glass. It was just like sand, but like only one hand. It was like the outside hand, and they each had it. It was crazy, yeah.
But yeah. I'm surprised.
So my head chef and my sous chef at Della, they're both from the Gambia, which is like old school Senegal. And they were like, and they're like, oh, you must look at this. And they're like sending me videos. And I was just like, and they're big too. These are not little guys. These are big African dudes. And they
don't have weight classes.
They just, exactly. And they're like loincloths, and they beat the piss out of each other. And I was just like, oh man. At first I was watching, I was like, I might be able to get in there. And then I saw that, I was like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little more about like the adventures in Europe and like what's happening there, and get you to laugh a little bit more. So hang tight, everybody. We'll be back in just a few. Welcome back, folks. Again, happy Friday. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Tuning in with us today is my old friend and New York City-based photographer, actor, and investment property owner, Justin Hoch. We were talking about how his photography business started to zero in on the international wrestling scene. I'll say wrestling instead of grappling, or maybe he'll correct me. Over the years, based on his passion for both, he was a high school and college wrestler, and tying in the lessons of life that wrestling taught him, and then plugging that into some of his other adventures, and it started to bring in a little paycheck here over time, documenting wrestling matches all over the country, or all over the world. I'm sorry. We were talking about the national grappling scene, and we were just starting to talk about the international scene right before we went to the break. And I figured out what that circuit was. It was Kasai.
Do you know what country it's from?
It's right here. They're based in New York.
I was thinking about the sand.
Oh yeah, no. That was just badass Senegalese fighting. Just Google that, like badass Senegalese fighting, and you'll find the video. It'll be there. It's treacherous. No, I ran. I went the other way. I was like, it gave me nightmares.
I remember now. Yeah,
the boogeyman. No, Kasai. Do you remember? Is that familiar?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. So they just kicked off. They started in 2016. They probably didn't really start putting events on until 2017. And like the first one was pretty cool. Like, again, they were doing a lot of stuff out of like the Bowery Ballroom. And they even did one in Williamsburg at some space. But Hollis Gracie is one of the founders, and then he's got a couple other guys that are like more from the financial and marketing background. And just well funded, and well thought out, like trying to learn from the mistakes of like Metamoris and a couple of the other ones that just like didn't pan out. Good cards, paying fighters, great promotion, great event, and they got a lot of compliments on just the event itself and like putting something together. And I don't know, is it like UFC where they like sell beer and everything, or is it more like most of these events you go to? Are they buying beers and rooting like, yeah, kick his ass, or is it more like cerebral?
Depends on the event. Some of them have concessions, some of them don't. It's it's a wild west right now. Like there's a lot of different kinds of events, right? And people are just trying stuff and seeing what works. So there's a lot of interesting different sorts of approaches to it. But yeah, some of them do that and make it a big full-blown event, and there's definitely beer involved.
Selling hot dogs and popcorn. And then how does it, you were starting to talk about Europe and how it's different, and how like there's not, like if you go to college in France, they don't have a grappling team, that's competing. So what's the situation there besides the Bears?
Besides the Bears.
Besides Khabib.
Yeah, there's like a club structure, and there's the national governing body structure, right? So, you'll go to, Dagestan, right, where Khabib is from, and in Mahashkala, there's a training center, and if you go, one territory over into Chechnya, right, like they've got like their structure, and then one over in Ossetia, they've got their structure, and then you go south into Georgia, and they've got their structure. So there's a lot of those kinds of things, and that's kind of how it runs around the world. Then, you've got your nationally governing bodies, and there might be Olympic training centers. Like we have one in Colorado Springs, so we've kind of got that structure. But then, in Rome, they've also got their kind of thing where they have, a dormitory, and they've got athletes training there, and there's facilities, and they live there and they train there full time, and that's their job, right?
Yeah.
So that exists in different places, and and then there's like, other places where that structure doesn't exist, and you've got people just competing and trying to make it while they're working a full-time job doing something else.
Yeah.
Right. And that exists a lot of places too. So there's a lot of diversity in the way that the infrastructure.
Yeah. So I guess one of the biggest differences is just like the geography, like the footprint. It's like you've got a bunch of smaller European countries, and like you said, each one kind of does it a little bit different. Where here, it's more of like we have a big footprint, a bigger population. It's just like kind of unified to an extent nationally, where they're just like little bits and pieces changing all throughout.
Yeah. And then, like socioeconomic status of the countries makes a big difference too. Like Cuba doesn't have a lot of money, but they turn out some badass wrestlers. Holy cow.
And fighters in general.
Right.
Well, I feel like the harder hit countries are the ones that the dudes are just so scrappy and hungry. And it's just like, those are the guys that grew up with like the pristine training environment. Like some of them are great. Like the Hughes brothers, they're just phenomenal. They just they just kill it. But like you get those guys that just were like dirt poor and just like starving as a kid, and they will destroy you.
Yeah. Well, I remember seeing stuff about like world champion boxers. Like you could almost like find out what parts of the world are having more trouble economically based on like how good their fighters are, right? Like there's something like that, or where the world champions are from or something. I feel like I've seen that before.
Well, there's these documentaries too on like Thai fighters and Burmese fighters. And have you seen, there's this style from Burma, which is like just north of Thailand, and it's essentially Muay Thai, but they allow headbutts. It's treacherous. There's a documentary on Netflix. I always forget the name of it. Anyways, yeah. But I've seen a couple documentaries, and it's like these kids just from like poor farms, and dude, they started like 7 years old competing and like headbutting each other. And like, it's treacherous, but they do it just that's like their only way to get ahead. They're scrappy. I wouldn't want to get in the ring with one of those 7-year-olds. Like, no way, man. This dude's he's gonna leg kick my knee, and it's gonna blow out, and that's gonna be it. I'm just gonna be on the ground. Like, I'm too old for that shit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then in Europe, how do the events kind of play out? Similar or different to the US? And how does the funding work for that, especially for somebody like you, where they're bringing you in as like a freelance? Because you go for a while sometimes, right?
Yeah. When I do that, I don't get paid by the events, right? Like when I'm going to, I was in Kazakhstan, right, in like last year, and I've been to Budapest, and I've been to Paris, and I've been to Macon, France. So when I'm going to those events, I'm shooting them freelance, and I get paid by the sponsors of the athletes, right? So they want marketing photos for their sponsors. So that's how I make that work. One time I worked for United World Wrestling, which is the world governing body, and I went to the Junior World Championships one year and shot that, and so they paid me like a day rate, paid my expenses and that kind of thing. So like those situations, there are a couple like leagues around the world. Like there's a Bundesliga in Germany where they have competitions, and there's like teams, and it's run like a soccer league, or like a Major League Baseball or something like that, right? Like they have athletes come in and they put together matches, and there's a short season, right? India also has one. So you'll have some of those, but most of the places around the world, like the Olympic movement is their professional league, and they'll support them. Like in Russia, like you win a world title and you get an apartment, right?
Yeah.
But it's also expected that you're going to win the world title. Like if you're on the Russian team, like not winning is a failure.
I was gonna say, what happens if you don't win? he disappeared. We don't know where he went for a walk one day.
Yeah, well, I mean, joke, but
yeah, no, I'm fucking serious.
yeah, no, people die strange deaths sometimes.
Yeah. And for some of these guys, like with Russia, it's probably a lot. Like with the communist countries, it's state sponsored.
Yeah, and not even just the communist ones. Like there's just different countries, make it a national priority. Like, our Olympic movement isn't, I don't believe it's government funded at all. I think it's all
right.
like donors and whatever kind of commerce that the different governing bodies can kind of put together. But yeah, in some countries, it's part of the state system, right? Like they believe in it and they fund it and they do a good job with it.
And then where are the places that the athletes are making the rest of their money, the bulk of their money, where they can bring you in to deal with marketing? Is it through sponsorships, through like associated branding and stuff like that?
Sometimes I'll go to an event and the producer of the event will pay me. But again, I make it work through the athletes, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like the athletes themselves, like their the package money, the prize money probably isn't enough to survive off of, right?
No, certainly not. No. So that's the regional training center model. Some of them have good sponsorship deals with their like apparel companies and stuff like that.
Right, that's what I mean.
Some of them are making good money, but it's like a handful of people, right? The regional training center system, that's actually where a lot of these guys are and women are making a career out of wrestling. And it's not a lucrative thing, right? Like they're not making NBA money or
right. They're not buying cars and shit like that.
Yeah, right. So
the same here. Even like with the top grapplers in the States, like they just a lot of them just have like an apartment and that's it. But they're doing what they love, Yep.
Yeah, and then they subsidize it with camps and things like that. So
seminars and everything.
Yeah, right. So they're figuring it out. But the regional training center model, that's really enabled a lot of people to wrestle full time.
Yeah. So it's a lot like what you were saying at the beginning, like how making the move to New York, like being multifaceted and having like a couple like tricks up your sleeve. These guys have figured out how to do that within like the ones that are the most successful. Like you said, some places they got a day job still. Like George St. Pierre was a trash man in Montreal and would like train on the weekends. Some of those guys are doing that, but the rest of them just within the grappling world have gotten creative with sponsorships. The centers that you're speaking of, sometimes state involvement, so on and so forth to pull something together.
And coaching, actually, some of them
are
coaches at college programs or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Well,
all
right. We're going to take one more quick break. We'll be back, everybody. We're going to wrap this one up. Hang tight. We'll be back in just a few. All right, everybody. We're going to wrap this one up here. We're talking to Justin Hoch. He is a grappler, a photographer, an actor, an investment property owner, and a handyman, among other things. And we were talking throughout the show about all of his misadventures leading him to being a grappling photographer and like kind of keeping the ball rolling, what the international scene is like, what the national scene is like. And the influence of actually training grappling and wrestling, and this is something I've talked about many times on the show, the effects, the mental effects of committing to something like that and how it can exponentially make your job better, your business better, your home life better. So I'd love to, kind of take some time here at the end to tie that in. And we were just discussing at the end of the last portion how these wrestlers in other countries, especially where there's not a college circuit, like getting really creative and pooling their resources to come up with a type of income that actually allows them the opportunity to hire somebody like Justin to, fly across the globe and document their process and help share the story, which is something that Justin has highlighted as well as a passion of his. So what are some suggestions, Justin, for the kids coming up, the next grappling photographers that are all listening and just waiting for your wisdom? What would you say to them for somebody that was like trying to come up and do this?
Gotta get creative, right? You gotta find a need, and whether that's finding one that exists or creating it.
Yeah.
Like you just figure out a way to make it work. And I think I've had to do that, and I've been fortunate to have opportunities that kind of presented themselves to me, right? Like, I won a couple of awards. I got like a photographer of the year award and a journalist of the year award, and getting those really like kind of helped springboard my my economic side of it, right? So I think just being good at what you do, right? Like if you put out a good product and you put it out in the world, and it's a community of people, like people will come to you. So it's been a mixture of that, like just busting my ass and trying to get really good at it, and constantly evolving and constantly thinking about new ways to do it, and then coming up with ways to make it a business, right? Like I started this portrait project 5 years ago now, and I turned that into a business model where I would go to tournaments and take portraits of people, and people would pay for that. So, it's just figuring out how you can make it work, right? Like there's transferable skills, right? There's different models that exist in different other places that you may be able to modify and adapt and implement in a different space, and trying to do that kind of stuff. So
and then go ahead, finish it.
Yeah, it's the same thing that applies to anything else, right?
Right.
You put the time in. If you're passionate about it and you are excited about it, then it'll work out, right? Like I never pursued this because I thought I was going to make a lot of money, right? Like it was always about just something I really cared about and something I really wanted to invest myself in and my time in. And the money part has kind of like figured its way out like along the way, in part because I'm like pursuing it, and in part because it just so happens that when you do a lot of things, and if you start doing them well, like people will start to pay you for it.
Well, you certainly can get better at something when you remove the profit motive. Like when that's your hyper focus. It's funny. I had a meeting last night with a guy who was interested in opening his own restaurant, and he's ran a bunch of them here in New York, and knows the business, but he's never taken that final step. And he's looking at the landscape right now, and he's like, I think it's time. And I'm like, it's a great time to get into a restaurant because there's so many empty ones, and you can just the cost of entry is so low. And I said that to him. I was like, it's good that you're passionate about this, because there will be times that that's the only thing surviving you, where you're not making enough money. You're looking at it and you're like, this is not profitable, because it just ebbs and flows. There's no consistency to it. And I was like, but if you're really passionate, and I was like, I get the feeling, the sense that you are, like that's good. You just like focus on that, because when you focus too much on paper and on numbers, like your behaviors change, and then the passion starts to like dissipate a little bit, and then you start, especially if that tactic doesn't work out and you still don't end up making the money, then it really starts to like, you start to talk yourself to the ledge, and you're like, I don't know about this, man. I don't know about this at all. And so how things like, there's great advice just in general. How has that serviced you over the last 7 months, where like events kind of got put, even travel was kind of like put to a standstill. Events were put to a standstill. Fortunately you had made the smart move to deal with like some investment real estate, which seems like that's helped out. What are some of the other things you've done to just like help you get through this, difficult situation?
Well, I've never had a shortage of things to do, right? Like I'll go to a tournament and shoot 30,000 photos and not edit all of them, right? So, it's interesting. For a long time, I'd been so like moving on from one event to the next and never feeling like I could catch up on things.
Yeah.
That there was this like little fantasy in my head about like, if I could like put the world on pause, right? Like Zach Morris style, like call a timeout.
Yeah.
And just have time where nothing else was happening. I wasn't missing anything. And I could just sit at home and edit and work on things and like catch up and get some things together. That would be amazing. Well, I didn't think that that would ever happen. And I certainly never envisioned it happening this way.
Yeah.
But, like if you can't control it, what can you take away from it that's positive? Right. So, it was hard. Like, I didn't have a gig for 5 months. Right. So I had no income coming in for 5 months. And I had all the time to do things. So I was working on things and I was, catching up and like sleeping for a change. And that was really nice. And, doing whatever. But it was an opportunity. Right. And I just tried to find ways to do it. Like, how do I make images when I can't be in the places I want to make those images? So it was a creative exercise too, and trying to figure out, how can I take, screen captures of things, and is that a form of photography? And what does it even mean to be a photographer? So it was an interesting set of exercises, and now I actually feel like things are really picking up, and I've got a bunch of different projects that I want to start going. You talked about Dan Gable recently.
Yeah.
Episodes. He just got announced that he's going to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And so I'm working on trying to get a project together where I go and photograph him for a few days and go crazy ceremony and stuff. So I've got some, optimistic kind of hope about that. And these events that are popping up, there's a business model that is interesting outside of the wrestling community about, how are people making this economy work, right? And what opportunities has the coronavirus pandemic presented and created for people to start doing that? So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the world that are opportunities. Like, even in the midst of terrible stuff happening, there's opportunity, and sometimes that's where the opportunity is created from. So
awesome. Fantastic stuff. Where can people find out about you? We're gonna have to wrap it up and drop the digits. Where can all the ladies get in touch with you?
This went so fast.
It does. It always does. Yes.
My website is probably the best place to go, and then that links to everything else. So that's JHoch.com, which is JHoch.com. And you go there, and that'll link you to everything else. It's got all my other social handles, and it's got images that you can look at and all that kind of stuff.
Headshots, lots of headshots.
Well, I have another business for that. That's hochshots.com.
Hochshots.
Yeah,
I love it. That's such a great and like awful name at the same time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a dad joke vibe to it. But...
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, man. Great stuff. Really, like, fantastic advice. Great messages, and also just great to catch up.
I appreciate it. This was fun.
Get your ass back down to the city. Let's do this. Let's find a couch to rip apart. Let's just find one.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. We can make that happen.
We can definitely happen that. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next week. Peace out.